We plan, God laughs, an old Yiddish proverb. Having learned from my 2022 goals what reasonable goal setting looks like, I resolved to push several of my projects to the next stage while tackling a couple smaller personal growth projects. I drew up a list of goals that seemed pretty reasonable and started my year. And the table absolutely got flipped. A minor goal became the most accomplished project of the year, and by May, much of my remaining attention was co-opted by the out-of-left-field goal of learning to speak Japanese. So in 2023, I hoped to, number 1, work with an illustrator on The Firebird, my children's story, and have around half of the artwork done this year if possible. The revised goal as of February was to start work on the illustrations this year with no required end goal deadline at this time. So, this did not work out as I originally hoped, but that is legitimately okay. Neither I nor the illustrator have had time to focus on this project, and even if the illustrator had time to give me more, I still would have had to put this on the back burner for reasons detailed in the rest of the post. I have a few spot illustrations that are adorable and they give me a lot of hope for a future book, but right now this project is fully on the back burner for both of us. So, in the end, I got 3 spot illustrations of the baby bird this year that made me smile. Number 2, finish revising Thicker Than Water Tales and have them proofread by an editor. Revised goal as of February, to revise the second story in the series Worse Than Death by the end of the year. I only managed to revise 4 chapters of Worse Than Death this year. I felt extremely guilty setting this aside, but something came up that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt was more important, and that was number 3, write 1 original short story per month. Now, this was my goal to stretch myself into original fiction. Mostly, I wanted to keep myself trying to generate original fiction until I got more comfortable with it. Instead, the Ramara phenomenon happened. By now, it is a collection of short stories or somewhat longer story arcs, while also being a cohesive novel, and I can envision the approximate shape of its end. As of the end of 2023, I have written 21 chapters and about 68,000 words in this novel, which is far more than I intended when I set this goal for myself. I have what looks like 2/3 of a fantasy manuscript that I didn't expect to have when I tacked this goal onto the end of my list last year. I am ecstatic. Number 4, face my fears about information. Specifically, this goal was meant to kick my butt to watch and read things that I was afraid to consume because, number 1, I thought it would shake my view of the world, or number 2, I was afraid that touching certain titles would cause others to hate me. I dragged myself to very occasional pieces of media early on, like The Case Against the Case for Christ by Robert Price, or the Forever Prisoner documentary. Yeah, that's a pretty sparse list. I was still scared. After October 7th of this year, I chose to confront a topic that I felt I had to take a stand on. It's funny how posting my opinion about Israel kind of killed the fear I had about diving into controversial or antagonistic pieces of media. After that, I consumed Bibi by Benjamin Netanyahu, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold documentary, the Lady Ballers comedy, a lot of Ben Shapiro podcasts, and 2 books about Israel so far. On deck are The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi, unless I can find a better recommended title. Enough different books about Israel that I will hopefully get a sense of what happened, where, and when, and A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. At the beginning of this year, I was timid about all of this. I'd even decided that I wasn't going to read anything about former President Trump for 20 years until all the vitriol died down and I had a snowball's chance in hell of getting a calm assessment of the facts. Post October 7th, oddly enough, as I tested the idea of diving into that sinkhole, I was not terrified anymore. It's not my focus at this time, but I won't rule out a few books up that alley in the coming year. So in the end of that, I am occasionally hesitant about consuming certain media, but I am no longer terrified. Number 5, face my fear about heights. To that end, I intend to visit an aerial adventure course at least twice this year, By the end of the year, I want to be able to jump off a diving board into a foam pit at a trampoline park without getting stuck up there. Some fear of heights is reasonable. I have determined that mine is not. After discussing my situation with an employee at a rock climbing gym, which also has a ropes course, I opted to start out rock climbing their easiest courses with an auto belay, which is a device that lowers you slowly to the ground if you slip or let go of the wall. I started out going up a few feet, then letting myself down, then going up a few more handholds and letting myself down. I did that about 4 times before I let myself get to the top of the course, and then let myself down. I cried out or whimpered every single time, but I climbed courses for just under an hour at the beginning of March. It was great, and I was all set to come back once or twice a month until I'd kicked this fear. And then I never went again. And I never went back to the trampoline park either. It had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with time. Writing the Ramara phenomenon took a lot of time and focus, and so did, surprise, number 6, learn Japanese. Sergei had, years ago, mentioned wanting to spend a year or 2 in Japan at some point and asked me if I would learn Japanese with him. I told him I didn't have the focus required to learn a foreign language unless he could assure me that a relocation was actually going to happen. It must have been March or April of this year when talks started. He was serious. He really wanted it to happen. He wants us to spend a year there with the intention of learning the language and finding out if Japan is a place we want to permanently move to. We wrestled with the details and hard questions for a couple of months. I struggled with depression and anxiety over this massive looming change that was going to upend everything. But by May or June, when the emotional dust settled, it morphed into a sense of adventure. Japanese is a difficult language to learn, says the native English speaker, to the frustration of anyone trying to learn this hot mess of a language. For a while, I managed to keep up with learning Japanese vocabulary, the various characters and symbols, and even maintained a 104-day Duolingo streak. I even started learning kanji on Wanikani, a site that's really well set up to help you learn Japan's logogram system. Sergei and I also picked up a textbook called Genki, and we've been going through it for new vocabulary, practice questions, and sentence construction. Then I started writing the Ramara and the Tiny Man arc, and everything else fell away for about a month and a half. House cleaning fell behind, meetings were put off, and I had to hire security because I broke my Duolingo streak and now the owl is gunning for me. Just kidding about that last one, but I did break my streak. As I come back to Japanese, I realize how much focus learning the language properly takes. To that end, I feel that I now have to set the Ramara phenomenon aside for a few months to catch up properly. After all, we are looking at middle to late next year to start our initial 1-year scouting trip to Japan. So by the end of that, I've learned all the hiragana and most of the katakana letters, several kanji, and I'm comfortable with many vocab words and a few kinds of sentences. I have familiarity, if not comfort, with even more vocab words and sentences. That's an awful lot for this year. With all of that in mind, what are the 2024 goals? Number 1, finish a first draft manuscript of the Ramara phenomena. Number 2, prepare or repair the house and all its systems so that it can weather our absence well. And number 3, be able to read a Japanese children's book and or largely understand a manga, Japanese graphic novel, and or understand most of what is being said in an anime, Japanese animation. Come at me, 2024.